The first thing here is that from my limited knowledge, there are already bomber-class ships alongside the X-Wings in Star Wars. They are called B-Wings and Y-Wings. The latter fired proton torpedoes. They are used as orbital bombardment as they can breach shields if used in the right frequency. What we can see, however, are these newly designed bombers that are extremely weak and ineffective compared. Rian Johnson, the writer-director, wanted to closely reference World War II bombers, and he even showed a film in relation to this to the crew in order to nail the reference. That is wonderful, and it shows a level of passion, but it failed miserably in execution. This is because it didn't need to exist and doesn't perform the task any better than the previous ships. Immediately we see a selection of TIE fighters blast through one of the bombers because it is extremely slow and lacks any form of armor or shielding, which would beg the question of why are they not using Y-Wings again. Then the Dreadnought prepares to strike Leia's cruiser, which as far as the audience knew was actually not an option, since if this was an option then you would obviously attack the Raddus first, which is Leia's cruiser. The main cruiser the Resistance is using right now is the Raddus. It is the only one they have left. You should probably shoot that before they can jump to hyperspace. Now there have been arguments against this. One that was popular said they did not know the base was empty, that's why they shot it first. This is nonsense. Star Wars has already established that they can scan for life at great distance.
There goes another one.
Hold your fire. There's no life forms. It must have short-circuited.
As well as the fact that as soon as they arrive, they spot the Raddus, the only remaining large cruiser for the Resistance. Had the Dreadnought shot the logical target first, the film would have been over, so the writers gave the Dreadnought a false target to shoot first and create tension by threatening Leia's ship secondarily. This threat becomes even more frightening when we realize there is only one bomber left, but how did this happen? Well, half a singular TIE fighter accidentally flies into the base of one of the bombers and sets off a chain reaction that blows up 3 of them. What remains now is one bomber, as we do not know why the other 3 were destroyed, though we can guess since they are so monumentally weak. The last of the bombers makes it to the target area, but they fail to release their bombs, and so a girl attempts to kick the ladder in order to create enough of a shake to drop the controller for the bomb release from the top of the ladder. This would allow her to activate the bombs. This scene is played very emotionally, and she only manages to pull it off in the last few seconds, destroying the Dreadnought. I put it to you, my humble audience, that this sequence is extremely poorly written, and thus makes it very difficult to enjoy from certain viewers' perspectives. Firstly, the bombers are very slow, very large, and very weak. We need these ships to be placed right above the target, which is extremely dangerous compared to the requirements of a Y-Wing or any at-distance shooter. Therefore, you would expect these ships to be resilient, especially to basic weaponry from fighters. But they are not. The ships take a very long time to reach the destination compared to a Y-Wing. This is a problem because it allows the enemy fighters to decimate you along the way, and if these things are powerful yet fragile, you would expect them to be at least very fast to avoid being targeted easily. They are not. The ships on top of all of this are very large, providing a huge, slow, and fragile target for the enemies. This is blatantly poor ship design. Why are the Resistance using these ships instead of their normal bombers? The only argument I've heard is that their payload is capable of knocking out a Dreadnought where even a whole fleet of Y-Wings are not. This is a fabricated argument. The writers control whether this is possible, not the viewers. There is never a line to say these bombers are the only ones that are capable of this level of damage, and even if they were, that would be an artificial inconvenience to allow the use of these ships. The fact is that Y-Wings have been used to decimate Star Destroyers. The Dreadnought does not have shields. I'm pretty sure the Y-Wings would be fine. The Resistance using these ships is a plot hole, as we know they have access to what are probably smaller, faster, cheaper, and generally superior ships, and they are not using them. Why is this happening? It is happening so that Rian Johnson could indulge in his love of World War II style bombers. The heart is getting in the way of the mind. But there's more. Why did the person who was supposed to drop the bombs just die? There is nothing to show why. He's just lying on the ground dead. On top of that, why doesn't the pilot drop the bombs from his cockpit? Does he not have that ability? He is clearly killed after they are meant to drop the bombs, and if he had been killed in an explosion before they reached their destination, it would have explained his death as well as the dead guy that the girl finds. I think they may have edited this out of place. If you have the pilot die and the bomber person die, it leaves the gunner to perform the task. That makes sense. But it is not how this series of scenes goes. Also, why isn't it voice activated? That would probably be a useful piece of technology here compared to a button. Moving on from all that though, the payload releases and it's actually bizarre. Never before have we seen this sort of method in Star Wars, but this is where we will start to bring in many arguments for the defense of the film and try to respond to them. So, why do the bombs drop when there is no gravity? The responses I've heard for this are, the gravity is from the planet, the artificial gravity is from the bomber, and once they are dropped it passes into space and maintains its momentum. The gravity is from the dreadnought, it's pulling the bombs to it. The bombs are magnetized. So let's tackle this. The planet is far off in a completely different direction. If it was pulling the bombs, they wouldn't fall to the dreadnought. The artificial gravity of the ship could create the momentum required to explain why they drop, though that still seems weak. The dreadnought couldn't possibly create the gravity required to pull the bombs at that speed that they drop. The bombs may be magnetized. That would actually make a lot more sense. In fact, that's some good writing to make up for the inappropriate ship design. However, this would be an example of somebody writing the script for Ryan, and it's not the first example. Now, why is there a gaping hole in the floor of this spaceship? Why wouldn't this be sucking the atmosphere right out of the ship? The response to this is either, you are right, that doesn't make sense, or there is a force field that protects people from the atmosphere of space but allows for bombs to release, you simply didn't see it. Assuming the latter is true, it is very much a piece of cop-out writing to allow for the visual, as well as it being the first we've seen of this class of ship, so information would be nice. What you could have done is have a little robotic voice saying,
"Force field activated."
Anyway, the amount of time it takes to loose the payload from the bomber means that the first bomb would likely have a chain reaction from the dreadnought all the way to the bomber itself. In fact, this is exactly what we are shown. This is horrible design. How does a bomber survive a bombing run? Are these ships meant to be destroyed once they attack their target? Please remind me why they are not using Y-wings again. Aside from its own kamikaze aspect, it will also allow enemy fighters to rescue the target from destruction by committing suicide, as we've already seen. It's very simple, it costs one fighter to rescue an entire dreadnought now, and you wouldn't even need human sacrifice, have a droid do it, or even shoot the bombs as they release. They could literally park a TIE fighter just below the bombers, and as soon as they open up, just open fire. So in conclusion, we have ships being brought to the brink and ultimately sacrificing themselves to destroy the enemies in a tense, action-packed scene of survival to prevent the destruction of the Resistance. It sounds fantastic in theory, a classic heroic tale of sacrifice, but the writer did a horrendous hatchet job of supplying the elements and environment to make this happen. Ryan wanted the sacrifice, he wanted the World War II bombers, he wanted the tension, and he wanted the relief of success, but he didn't earn any part of it, and so the scene is an utter writing mess, and the bombers being shoehorned in as a result break many of the logistics and rules set in place by reality or by Star Wars itself.